Hello and welcome to another episode of Business Beat with me, Odette. Today is part 2 of a 3-part series, a really important conversation on transformation. And if you missed part 1, please go to the Morning Show's social media platforms at Morning Show SA. You definitely don't want to miss what happened last week, and you definitely want to stay tuned to what's coming next week. Still with me is Deon Oberholzer from the Gestalt Group. He is a BEE expert strategist. Deon, welcome back to this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. We ended part 1 when we spoke about, is transformation about black versus white? When you go into a client's business and you help them put in place their strategy for transformation. Let's pick up there.
Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately or historically, the whole transformation agenda is about black and white or shades of grey in terms of the demographics of our society. And what it tries to do is focus on the areas where we have to do the most to catch up to the starting line. So if we envisage a race economy, not everybody's at the starting line. Some people are miles away from the starting line. And historically, as a result of centuries of the way South Africa developed, there are groups of people that are very far away from the starting line and needs a lot of help to get there. And that's where we find the focus should be in order to bring everybody to a point where they can compete fairly.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. Government, we know at the end of last year they published some reviews, some changes to the Preferential Procurement Act. And those changes came into effect this year, in fact in January, right? So this affects how government buys from or procures services from anybody. Talk to us about how the changes in these regulations are now impacting businesses in South Africa. Okay. Big, medium, small entrepreneurs, what's happening?
When you look at the transformation agenda and government procurement, you tend to find that that's where the buck starts. Government spends money and that then cascades through the economy. Not always, but that's a big part of it. And government took it upon themselves to create a set of rules and regulations, laws and acts in terms of how they will procure in order to advance the transformation agenda.
Isn't this also because at one point, and maybe you can help us, government was the biggest client in the country, the biggest spender in terms of procuring services, am I right?
Yes, there was for example, the infrastructure spend that were announced by the President a couple of years ago would have made a significant impact in terms of infrastructure, development in public upliftment, etc., etc., etc. So it spends a lot of money, collects a lot of taxes, and it knows that it has a responsibility itself.
Right.
So what happened over time, they developed a set of regulations and they come up with a point system and specific rules about subcontracting and local content, and effectively said that if you have a large contract, maybe more than 50 million, 10% of the points awarded for you is not about the quality and the product specs, etc., etc. It's about your transformation. And they link that straight to the BEE codes.
Wait. So out of 100 points,
yes,
10 points is for transformation.
Yes.
90 points is for what?
Is for quality, product, value for money, specifications, branding. So if you want to buy a truck for a specific piece of work that the government's doing, they need to specify the truck and they need to pay for the truck, but they're saying there's a premium that is considered, that is that incentive that we spoke about in the previous section.
But it's only
that
10%.
In small contracts it's 20, so anything below 50 million.
Okay.
So there's a lot of business you do that is less than 50 million rand a contract.
Of course.
So it's the big contracts where there's a lot of things at stake. Large constructions, you build a dam, you don't want it to fall over. So you need to be clear about the specifications, etc., etc., but still allow for. But bear in mind that that's also where the cascading happened. So the laws were about local content, and it was about the companies participating, their BEE score, their ownership, and it created an organism, a universe that was promoting transformation. Then we had this court case a couple of years ago that found that the regulations were not constitutionally acceptable and government had to scrap it. And then government had to very quickly come up with another set of rules that were not constitutionally invalid, and that's what we see that got implemented in January.
So, if these rules were now implemented from January of 2023, what happened in January?
So what happened in January, in November actually, but became effective in January, government came out with a new set of procurement, which they now say is a placeholder set of legislation. Now, the moment somebody says it's a placeholder, you should panic. Because that means they didn't think about it, they didn't understand the consequences, they haven't done their homework, but they're putting something down so that procurement can continue, but it's probably going to be a little bit wobbly in terms of its construct, and that's exactly what we have now.
Oh, wow.
So all of the stuff we spoke about where the procurement regulation cascaded to the economy is now stopped. It is now on specific goals, and those specific goals is ownership.
Ownership.
Only ownership.
Only ownership.
Which means, and I've seen this in tenders, one of my clients, a large client, came to me with a tender document from one of the municipalities that says, okay, there are 20 points in this tender, 6 of them are for black ownership, 6 of them are for black female ownership, 100%, and 4 of them are for 40% black disabled ownership and 40% for black female disabled ownership.
The transformation, from what I'm understanding, is evolving in a conversation that says ownership.
Yeah, so it's evolved backwards.
Yes.
And now what has happened is the entire business incentive for businesses to reach a high level has just been temporarily moved off the table.
Okay.
So being a level 1 black woman-owned organization that used to give you good recognition in the scorecard, that's irrelevant.
Okay.
Being a level 1, 51% black ownership company, that doesn't really matter.
This thing about the sector councils, these are the councils that are supposed to be regulating the codes. Surely these codes input into how things like amendments to the preferential procurement rules, which are now a bit wobbly, are they not supposed to be working hand in hand with government? Are these councils working? Is it not working? Like, what's happening?
It's one of those questions that doesn't have a simple answer, because some councils are working really well, some councils are really not functioning at all. And the original intention with sector councils were that they would oversee transformation in their sector based on the sector code that they developed.
Right.
And it was all well and going forward, and then government pulled the plug on the funding, and they had to find ways of funding themselves.
Oh, wow.
And that changed a lot of things, because if you get paid a salary, you can do a job. But if you now have to go to industry, make them pay your salary, and they don't necessarily agree with what you're doing, it creates a conflict. So now this nice cohesive process of I'm regulating my sector, here are the rules, you can ask me any question, I'll give you guidance. Constructions, for example, very responsive. A couple of years ago, you ask them a question, they help you, they publicize their changes, and everybody can follow the rules. And if the rules doesn't make sense, you make a good case is it. Then they pulled the plug on the funding and everybody had to go find jobs. So does it work? Yeah, sort of, but not quite. So that feedback loop that was built into the structure, that if something is done and it has severe unintended consequences, you have a pathway of dealing with it so that you can find an answer that makes sense. That seems to be missing now. And that's quite scary, because that means people now arbitrarily do things that they think will work in the sectors, but it doesn't quite align with the agenda, and then you get requests for changes, like the Mac sector asking for 75% ownership. This is a recent example. Was it thought through? Where does it go?
We're going to pick up on this discussion in part 3, because I'm now very perplexed. I'm very perplexed that the whole premise of transformation, which is about Ubuntu, which is about equality and equal opportunity, is becoming about the haves and the have-nots. But let's chat about that in part 3. This is very, very important if you're a big company, medium-sized company, or a budding entrepreneur hoping to participate in the economy and grow your business into the next conglomerate. Until next time.